But without further ado, I want to hand it over to Jason to kick us off today. And I'd love to start off, Jason, by having you just introduce yourself, kind of who you are, a few layers of your identity that are most important to you, and we'll jump into the topic.
Yeah, so thanks for having me, Mitch. So my name is Jason Shim, and I currently serve as the Director of Digital at the Ontario Science Centre. And a few layers of identity that I bring to today's conversation is that I've spent my career pretty much working at the intersection of nonprofits, technology, and youth. In addition, I'm also a second-generation Chinese Canadian, and growing up in that context, I saw the challenges that my parents faced as immigrants and parents, and that further informs what I try to do to support others. And personally, or more personally, I'm also a recent father. And for me, that has really underscored the importance of the work that I engage in.
With just like the cutest little baby in the world.
Yeah.
It's adorable.
Yeah.
Well, Jason, appreciate you joining today. And, with all of this experience, both direct work in the nonprofit world, as well as being the chairman of the board of the Nonprofit Technology Enterprise Network, N10, for many years, we know that you are truly the expert in this topic. And I'd love to, as we're talking about busting through bureaucracy, I think would be great to just start off with why is this topic important? I mean, I hear about it a lot, but I'd love to hear from your perspective. Why do you think it's important that we spend the time on this today?
Yeah, why it's important is because at some point in everyone's career, they're going to face this in terms of the bureaucracy within organizations, and in some other contexts it's referred to as organizational headwinds. And you can experience it as a person that is new to an organization. You might experience it as someone who has been with an organization for a while looking to implement change, but it's important that folks understand, why some of these challenges emerge over time, and B, how to deal with them, because ultimately changes that need to be done within an organization, they do require an understanding of the bureaucracy itself, but also how to navigate it. And the thing is that if anyone who's looking to steer change within an organization, if you ignore it, it becomes that much more difficult to shift things within an organization. So whether you're trying to implement something, whether you're trying to convince folks to undertake, a different, set of behaviors, this is something that is quite universal when it comes to, work within the nonprofits.
Yeah, and I think we always think of bureaucracy as negative, as kind of like the enemy we're tackling today. But I guess, what are some of those negatives that you see, and are there some positives that we should be mindful of why these systems exist?
Yeah, I think it depends on the expectations that folks bring to organizations. And what I mean by that is that, sometimes things can feel slow. And naturally, if there's a mismatch of expectations between hey, something should, be this fast or this slow, and there's a mismatch of that, that will naturally lead to feelings of frustration. Taken to an extreme, the slowness can sometimes lead people to what feels like a full stop, which, can feel like decision paralysis within organizations as well. And the thing is, it's not a bad thing necessarily that this exists, because, if decisions are made too quickly within organizations, that has a whole set of other kind of outcomes and potential consequences. And so when thinking about, certainly the negatives is that, things can move slowly, and it can feel super frustrating when trying to, steer through change. If I were to look at it on the flip side, what are the, good things about bureaucracy? It's that sometimes, for organizations, it's that it allows the time and the steps for due consideration, and to prevent poor outcomes, ideally. So I think that there are times when very intentional process can ensure that proper deliberation and consideration are given when looking at kind of bigger picture things for an organization.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that urgency, like you said, sometimes it's good to have some breaks on urgency, because urgency doesn't always serve us. I think where I see this come up a lot, and the reason we wanted to have this session is we have people that come to Pond or come to me and they're like, oh, there's this cool new technology I know we can implement, or we have to get rid of our old CRM. I can't stand it. And I can't get anyone's like buy-in or engagement around this change I want to see in our organization. So I guess starting from there, because I think that's usually where it starts, is there's like this frustration that you want to change. What do you advise is like the first step someone takes once they're like, all right, I've had it, we need something different?
Yeah. I think that the first step is first identify, is there an existing process within an organization, for change? So, for some organizations, this may already exist. And, just to go back to the bureaucracy kind of part and the linkage to that is that sometimes there's an attribution of bureaucracy as a result of process, but it's actually, if there's a lack of process, that can actually produce bureaucracy in itself, because you're trying to figure out what to do in the moment, and reinventing the wheel each and every time. So if someone is interested in implementing something like, say, a CRM, I think that the first thing to really recognize is what is the core challenge that you're really trying to implement. Oftentimes it's beyond the technology. Like technology ultimately is a tool, and like, what is it that you're really trying to achieve? And I think a question that needs to be explored and answered is, while it may present as a CRM, the bigger question may be something along the lines of, what are the behaviors that you're trying to change within an organization? And what is your role and responsibility within that? So I think that sometimes, an analogy that can be helpful is that existing behaviors can be like the equivalent of everyone in an organization who's like eating burgers, and that if you're coming in trying to bring about change in whichever form, that it could be the equivalent of suggesting to everyone, like, hey, everyone, we should eat kale. And there isn't anything like necessarily bad about doing so. It's just people can get used to their habits. And so if someone is used to doing things in a certain way, or using another system or CRM, that it could be the equivalent of hey, I've been eating my burger consistently, like every Monday for years, and someone is coming in trying to tell me and sell me on the value of kale. And in terms of the initial steps around it, it's really doing a lot of listening and ensuring that you understand what the core problems are, that you're essentially solving a problem, and considerations around do you have the trust of the folks that you're trying to involve in the process as well. So I think there's a lot of applicability to trying to convince people to to move from burgers to kale, that to really run with the analogy, perhaps it's like maybe there could be intermediary steps where it's like, okay, can we try introducing burgers with kale, or before moving over to a full kind of menu set. Or maybe there needs to be a broader conversation around, like, maybe it's not actually the kale, maybe it's something that will achieve the objectives of eating healthier as a whole. But yeah, the first initial steps is really understanding, like, what are the fundamental behaviors that you're looking to change, and what is one's role and responsibility within that.
Yeah, it seems like really reflecting on the source of the problem, and not just a certain tool or system, but identifying like what processes exist and behaviors. And when you talk about doing a lot of listening, do you have suggestions on the right questions to ask, or the right ways to ask them when you're kind of doing that relationship building buy-in, to avoid the like, hey, everybody, we're eating kale now?
Yeah. I think a helpful question to often pose to folks is, it's very broad, but what's your biggest challenge? And there it abstracts it to a much higher level, where it could be a direct challenge that folks may have with technology, or it could be a broader job function that they have. And when you're able to pose these questions across multiple individuals in an organization, and getting a better sense of it is, you can get a better sense of what folks real underlying challenges are. So one question may be what are your biggest challenges? Another one is what are some opportunities that are available within the organization that you think that can be really leveraged? And I think that when you pose the same questions to a variety of folks too, it helps you to triangulate, where some of those opportunities are and if you're going in the right direction there. And so, if you're parachuting in with a preconceived notion of what the solution may be, I mean, that may be okay if you've already done, the groundwork of, listening to everyone intently and determining that is the ideal solution. And again, if it fits within one's, role and responsibility to do that. And I think that's another area that I would suggest to folks is really sometimes there's a sense of asking permission to do one's job. And I think making the distinction between consulting with those who are within an organization that may have some stake in the decision making, but also if ultimately it's your role and responsibility to really lead that change. It's the difference between having a conversation around can we do this? Or saying, do this, which, a very different tone, or, hey, this is really going to help our organization. Let's do this together. So those are three statements that have, very different tones across all three of those. And, sometimes it can defer, to the can we do this kind of tone. And, that's where the decision paralysis can kind of creep in. But, if the more that we can kind of stay within the, hey, let's do this together. This is going to help our organization. They're depending on the role within one's organization. It may be expected that folks are looking to an individual or a group of folks to take leadership on that and really present an option and lead folks together to do it, and not in a top-down directive way, but in a kind of collaborative way. In that it also presumes that one has built, the trust, to do that and to act accordingly.
Yes, it seems like, after you've kind of reflected on your own experience, then you've put in the time to ask thoughtful questions and engage with the other people that this affects. It's then also identifying am I the right person for this? And if I am, then not asking for permission and contributing to some of those more bureaucratic, slow processes, but taking the right collaborative approach makes a big difference. How do you think about assessing, now you've had these conversations, you've put your own willingness to move this forward out there in a productive way. How do you assess the readiness of the organization, or maybe advance the readiness before a big change?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of elements of trust in there. So within an organization that has a readiness to do it, it would be reflected in a history of being able to move fairly nimbly or quickly, and unlearning previous behaviors and engaging in new ones. And so what that can look like in a more practical sense is has the organization undertaken shifts in technology implementations before, or the changing software within an organization, that there's the corresponding supports and training that's available during that implementation. But really it's, I think, underlying all of this is the in-between relationships that folks hold, and on small teams, that math question where it's if you have a group of people, how many handshakes will it take to get everyone to ensure that they've shaken everyone's hand? In a group of say 3 people, that's 3 distinct relationships that are held. But as that number grows, that's an increasing web of trust that's needed. So by the time you get to a team of 30 people, that is 435 separate trust relationships that are needed. And so I think that for organizations to really keep in mind that insofar as it's about the implementation and moving it through, that there's another layer that takes a lot of time, where it's a proactive investment of making sure that there's trust among teams, that there's good communication flows among everyone, that if folks are able to get the information that they need, and also trusting colleagues to relay that information, that folks are going to speak up. So there's another layer to that as well, around ensuring that that network of trust is taken care of within an organization when it comes to implementation.
Yeah, so it's not just trust building individually, me as an individual with other people, but understanding that network and web of relationships across an organization. And I think that kind of culture, like you're saying, readies someone or readies an organization for a bigger change. And then I talk a little bit about like identifying and understanding and maneuvering through process. Like how does when now that you've done some of this pre-work and groundwork and foundational elements, how do you go about actually executing and moving something forward effectively?
Yeah, I think that when understanding some of the broader process, and again, this will vary widely for organizations, but one of the critical things is when thinking about resourcing for projects or initiatives, often, one of the initial kind of barriers or roadblocks will often come around budget. And I think what that necessitates is an understanding of the bigger picture elements of an organization, as in like, what is the budget cycle, for an organization, and is there an understanding of how it will fit into that, being able to articulate the benefits to the organization in order to position it within that an upcoming budget cycle. And from a process standpoint, if you're looking to position a project or an initiative, regardless of if there's process or not, it's being able to articulate the benefits to the organization, and agreement or consensus that what the fundamental challenges are for implementation. So is there agreement that it's good and that it should be implemented, but there's a lack of budget? Or if there's not agreement that it fits within the scope of the organization, then that's a separate conversation. And if the only thing standing in the way is budget, then it's as I mentioned before, understanding the relationship of the project to the budget cycle. And if there's a challenge, as in like, oh, we have to wait another year before the next budget, then it may be understanding like how sources of funding may be present within your organization. So, some things that come to mind are, okay, if it can't be funded until the next budget cycle, could this be a project that can be written up and bundled to work with, say, a fundraising or a development department for as a potential, ask to for a grant or funding to make it possible, or perhaps working with the team or a finance department around creating some structures, like it could take the form of a revolving fund. And so like what that would be is the from a process standpoint, like looking at how a project could be funded from a dedicated pool, that if it's a cost saving measure, that we're going to be this much more efficient if with this implementation, that the funds that are saved will be reinvested back into this fund that can then be used to fund this project. So from a process standpoint, I think getting those really kind of pragmatic things out of the way, because there's all these other layers of I think pulling people together and making sure that everyone's has a say, forming committees and doing those things. But I think underlying this from a process standpoint is if you are leading this project, it's really important that as a first step in the process, that you understand the context in how everything operates within your organization, so that you can be able to lead that effectively.
Yeah, and I really love how you've separated out like establishing buy-in on the concept, like, and separating that from barriers. So if you get everybody to agree that like, yes, that is a problem worth addressing. Yes, we like your solution. There's a timing or budget or staffing constraint of why it's not moving forward. Because now once you've established common ground, you just gave a ton of examples of like, okay, now I can get more creative around the budgeting issue or the staffing issue or timing or whatever. So I think that's really, really helpful advice. And I'd also love to talk a little bit about like, what are the resources people can turn to, and what do you find most effective, especially when people feel kind of like isolated in this journey, if they're like the one pushing it forward and feeling like they are taking on a lot of that by themselves.
Yeah, I think that when doing this work, sometimes, it can, to your point, it can feel quite, isolating in that, you're trying to enact, this change, and that, I, in this conversation, it's a fairly short conversation, but like, the things I'm talking about, sometimes this can take, months or years for, making this happen. And so, really, I think finding peers across, other organizations that may be doing similar work, or connecting with peer networks, and, getting, um, uh, getting outside kind of folks that you can chat with, or setting up, maybe a small group if one doesn't already exist. And, I think that has, over time provided a lot of support over the years, because, folks also bring in their knowledge, and that, you're able to connect with folks who are doing, the same work at other organizations as well.
Yeah, and talk a little bit about, because I know you, for the 10 plus years you were at Pathways to Education, and driving so much of the digital transformation there. Like, how did you personally cope with, it's tough when you have to have that long horizon and keep your own energy and kind of spirits up to keep driving an initiative forward.
Yeah. I think that definitely, ice cream certainly helped. And I know I joke about that, but sometimes I think it's, also recognizing, like, what do you need to kind of, rejuvenate yourself sometimes. And I think that, when you are taking on this type of work, it's having that reminder to yourself about the uh, the long-term impact, and doing what you need to do in order to, remind yourself of that, but also keeping yourself motivated. So, I think that there are projects out there that, fall within the, okay, this can be implemented in a month or a few months, and, you can see the rewards, as they come in. You can celebrate those milestones, and it's very satisfying. But when you start getting into projects that span, past 6 month horizon, or past the 1 year horizon, or you're trying to like move, towards a longer time horizon, like, really trying to figure out, like, okay, can you set up milestones, recognizing that it's a fundamental human need to, want to feel appreciated as well, and providing that grace for oneself, and, your teammates that are working with it as well, that, you need to think about those milestones in which it's like, all right, we're making good progress. And when you think about trying to do, like, say, a moonshot type goal, I think it's important to keep in mind that that is a huge leap, and that with a lot of possibility for, like, oh, either get there or you don't. But the thing is, while it may seem that way, it's really, when you think about organizational strategies, it's more important to get closer to that goal. So when thinking about um, staying motivated over the long term, it's, if it's possible, breaking that into smaller, projects along the way, and or milestones, or really just putting it to the calendar. It's like, all right, everyone, like, we're celebrating, and, that, we're making good progress. And I find that helped. And, sometimes it's, going back to ice cream, that for me, it could take the form of ice cream.
Yeah. I love that reminder to celebrate the interim steps for yourself, and definitely within the team. I think as a change management practice, that's really critical to reduce that, like, overwhelm and stress. And I also love what you brought up about incrementalizing change, and especially when you think about those complexities you mentioned of, like, growing number of relationships to manage. Is there a way to test out or implement something that you want to change within your own small team, and ladder up from there? I think is a really great, like, question to ask early on as well, where you can explore different options that are getting at the same underlying problem that you got to originally, but, figuring out the practical approaches to making progress on it.
Mhm. And I think that sometimes, and this doesn't necessarily apply for all projects or all approaches, but I think that when thinking about small gains, one thing that I like to reference is, the 1%, tiny gains, where, if you make an incremental improvement of 1% over the course of a year, 365 days, that actually amounts to a 37x multiplier. But it may not feel like it in the moment, but it's, those small incremental gains that can have some really significant results sometimes, and it's just keeping that in mind.
Yeah, that's super helpful. And to your point on, like, the peer networks, I know there are a lot out there. I would just flag to everyone on this call that Pond also, we just launched our own Slack community for nonprofit leaders. So everyone here who likely has something in their mind that they want to move forward in their organization, like be sure I will drop the link in the chat there to everyone if you want to be able to join that and just discuss the things you're working on and finding peers. We already have connections between people who are both working on a new website design or other projects they're trying to move forward, and being able to share best practices. It's a perfect place for it. So definitely encourage everyone here to join that Slack group. And we also really actively keep it to just nonprofit users on the platform. So Jason, I know we went a little over, but I appreciate everyone staying and you offering a little bit extra time. I think this was just really helpful to lay out a process for people and walk through some of those key milestones that they can think about in these processes and the right questions to ask. So appreciate you bringing all your wisdom to the group here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course. And of course, everyone, please check out all the upcoming sessions we have tomorrow. We're actually doing a 101 on using Slack for nonprofits with the Slack team. So that'll be really helpful if you're wanting some extra tips and tricks or advice on how to use the product. And next week, Camp Impact starts. So I hope to see all of you there. And thank you again, Jason. We'll see everyone soon.
Thanks, Mitch. That, you need to think about those milestones in which it's like, all right, we're making good progress. And when you think about trying to do, like, say, a moonshot type goal, I think it's important to keep in mind that that is a huge leap, and that with a lot of possibility for, like, either get there or you don't. But the thing is, while it may seem that way, it's really, when you think about organizational strategies, it's more important to get closer to that goal. So when thinking about staying motivated over the long term, it's, if it's possible, breaking that into smaller, projects along the way, and or milestones, or really just putting it to the calendar. It's like, all right, everyone, like, we're celebrating, and that we're making good progress. And I find that helped. Sometimes it's going back to ice cream. That for me, it could take the form of ice cream.
Yeah. I love that reminder to celebrate the interim steps for yourself, and definitely within the team. I think as a change management practice, that's really critical to reduce that, like, overwhelm and stress. And I also love what you brought up about incrementalizing change, and especially when you think about those complexities you mentioned of, like, growing number of relationships to manage. Is there a way to test out or implement something that you want to change within your own small team and ladder up from there? I think is a really great, like, question to ask early on as well, where you can explore different options that are getting at the same underlying problem that you got to originally, but figuring out the practical approaches to making progress on it.
Mm-hmm. And I think that sometimes, and this doesn't necessarily apply for all projects or all approaches, but I think that when thinking about small gains, one thing that I like to reference is, the 1%, tiny gains, where, if you make an incremental improvement of 1% over the course of a year, 365 days, that actually amounts to a 37x multiplier. But it may not feel like it in the moment, but it's, those small incremental gains that can have some really significant results sometimes, and it's just keeping that in mind.
Yeah, that's super helpful. And to your point on, like, the peer networks, I know there are a lot out there. I would just flag to everyone on this call that Pond also, we just launched our own Slack community for nonprofit leaders. So everyone here who likely has something in their mind that they want to move forward in their organization, like, be sure I will drop the link in the chat there to everyone if you want to be able to join that and just discuss the things you're working on and finding peers. We already have connections between people who are both working on a new website design or other projects they're trying to move forward, and being able to share best practices. It's a perfect place for it. So definitely encourage everyone here to join that Slack group. And we also really actively keep it to just nonprofit users on the platform. So Jason, I know we went a little over, but I appreciate everyone staying and you offering a little bit extra time. I think this was just really helpful to lay out a process for people and walk through some of those key milestones that they can think about in these processes and the right questions to ask. So appreciate you bringing all your wisdom to the group here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course. And of course, everyone, please check out all the upcoming sessions we have tomorrow. We're actually doing a 101 on using Slack for nonprofits with the Slack team. So that'll be really helpful if you're wanting some extra tips and tricks or advice on how to use the product. And next week, Camp Impact starts. So we hope to see all of you there. And thank you again, Jason. We'll see everyone soon.
Thanks, Rich.
Bye.